4 young men, drugged, raped, murdered. One predator walked free, again and again. And the police? They ignored the warnings, every single time. Was it failure or something far worse? In the early hours of June 19, 2014, a 23-year-old fashion student named Anthony Walgate was found dead outside a flat in Barking, East London. His body was slumped on the pavement, motionless, as if dumped in a hurry. The man who had called 999 claimed he'd stumbled upon a stranger who had collapsed outside his building. That caller was Stephen Port. What no one knew at the time was that Port wasn't just a concerned bystander. He was a predator. And Anthony was his first known victim. Anthony was a talented and ambitious young man from Hull. He had dreams of making it big in the fashion industry and had recently moved to London to chase that dream. Like many young adults, he used dating apps, including Grindr, a popular platform for gay men. On the night of June 17, 2014, he accepted a paid offer to visit a man in Barking. That man was Stephen Port. Stephen Port was 39 at the time. Outwardly, he was quiet and awkward. A chef by trade, living alone in a small flat. But behind closed doors, he was harboring disturbing fantasies involving control, submission, and drug-induced unconsciousness. When Anthony arrived at Port's flat, he was given a fatal dose of GHB, a powerful depressant that causes drowsiness, confusion, and memory loss. Port had used it many times before, but this time it led to Anthony's death. Port dragged Anthony's body outside, staging the scene to make it look like a drug overdose. Then he made the emergency call himself, lying to police about how he found the body. But cracks in the story appeared almost immediately. Forensics found Anthony's phone inside Port's flat. His laptop had been wiped, and his demeanor during police interviews was suspiciously distant. Despite these red flags, police failed to investigate Port properly. He was charged not with murder but with perverting the course of justice for lying about how he met Anthony. In March 2015, he served just a few months in prison. When he was released, he struck again. This moment, this failure, would change everything. Unbeknownst to investigators, the man they let walk free had already begun planning his next attack. Only 2 months after the body of Anthony Walgate was found, another young man was dead. Gabriel Kovari, a 22-year-old Slovakian student, had recently moved to London. He was described by friends as bright, creative, and curious about the world. Like Anthony, Gabriel was gay, young, and looking to build a life in the capital. He'd been staying with an older man he'd met online. That man was, again, Stephen Port. On August 28, 2014, Gabriel's body was found propped up against a wall in St. Margaret's churchyard, just 500 meters from Port's home. His glasses had been carefully placed on his face. A bottle of clear liquid sat next to him. Police ruled the death as an overdose. No autopsy was performed. There was no further investigation, but to anyone looking closely, the circumstances were eerie. The body placement, the location, the profile of the victim, all so familiar. Just 3 weeks later, on September 20th, a third body was discovered in the same churchyard. This time, it was Daniel Whitworth, a 21-year-old chef from Kent. Beside his body was a bottle and a note. It appeared to be a suicide letter, handwritten and signed by Daniel himself. In the letter, Daniel claimed responsibility for Gabriel's death and stated he could no longer live with the guilt. But there was a problem. Several, in fact. The note was riddled with inconsistencies. Daniel's handwriting didn't match, the timeline was off, and most shockingly, he made no mention of his boyfriend or family, something those who knew him found deeply suspicious. Then, the family interview clip says, Daniel was funny, warm, and deeply in love with his partner. He would never have done something like this, let alone not say goodbye. Police accepted the note at face value. The investigation was closed within weeks. At this point, 3 young men had died under nearly identical circumstances. All had been found in or near Barking. All were gay, under 25, and had met someone online. All had GHB in their system, and in every case, there was evidence of staging. But still, no murder investigation was launched. Why? At the time, the Metropolitan Police treated the deaths as isolated incidents, tragic but unrelated. Some reports later revealed that investigators didn't even cross-reference the victims' names in their system. What they missed, or ignored, was that Stephen Port had been in contact with all 3 victims before their deaths. Port was now growing more confident and more careless. He saw that police weren't connecting the dots. He believed he was untouchable. And so, less than a year later, he claimed his 4th and final known victim. Jack Taylor, a 25-year-old forklift driver from Essex, was last seen heading to meet a man in Barking. He told his sisters he'd just be going for a quick coffee. Instead, Jack's body was found near the same churchyard, positioned the same way as Gabriel and Daniel. GHB again showed up in toxicology. A small syringe was nearby. At this point, Jack's sisters refused to accept the police narrative. They pushed for answers, hard. We kept telling them this was no accident. There were too many similarities, and we were dismissed over and over. The family did what the police didn't. They searched Jack's phone records. They saw the last contact was with a man named Stephen Port. That discovery changed everything. When investigators finally searched Port's flat, they uncovered a mountain of evidence. A cache of date-rape drugs, dozens of used syringes, video files of unconscious men, and the murder weapons he used for his fantasy reenactments. More chillingly, they discovered that the suicide note found with Daniel Whitworth had actually been typed by Port, printed and forged to mislead authorities. Police finally arrested Stephen Port on October 15, 2015, 16 months after the first murder. He was charged with 4 counts of murder, multiple counts of sexual assault, and administering drugs with intent. But the damage had already been done. 4 men were dead, and the police had been warned repeatedly, not by their own instincts, but by grieving families, friends, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. Stephen Port didn't get away with murder once. He got away with it 4 times because no one was paying attention to the patterns. On a gray October morning in 2015, Stephen Port was arrested outside his flat in Barking, East London. Wearing jeans and a jacket, he looked unremarkable, even confused, as police led him away. His laptop, once wiped clean, now revealed dark online histories. Searches like "boy unconscious drugged" and "how to give someone GHB without them knowing." Even worse, there were homemade videos, dozens, of unconscious young men lying motionless on his floor or bed, some of them clearly being assaulted. Port didn't just kill his victims. He filmed them, posed them, and in some cases, kept their bodies for hours before calling police, if he called at all. He had been luring men on apps like Grindr, pretending to be charming, friendly, even offering money. But his true motive was control. Drug them, assault them, and if they died, cover it up. This wasn't just a murder investigation. This was a wake-up call. We had allowed a serial killer to slip through our fingers. Port was officially charged with 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of administering a substance with intent to stupefy, multiple counts of sexual assault and rape, and perverting the course of justice. As the trial approached, the nation watched closely, not only because of the horrific nature of the crimes, but because of the many missed opportunities that could have saved lives. The trial of Stephen Port began in October 2016 at the Old Bailey. Prosecutors laid out a timeline that showed deliberate, calculated actions, not accidents, not tragic coincidences. They described how Port used dating apps to target young, vulnerable gay men, lured them with false promises, drugged them without consent, and then staged their deaths to look like overdoses. The court heard how, He moved bodies between scenes to avoid suspicion. He forged the suicide note found with Daniel Whitworth. He even lied to police while under investigation, manipulating timelines and deleting data. The prosecution introduced chilling evidence. One video showed Port assaulting a man while he was unconscious. DNA linked Port directly to the victim's clothing and bedding. Phone records placed him at the scene of each encounter. And the most damning, he Googled his own victims after their deaths. The defense? Minimal. Port's legal team claimed he never intended to kill anyone, only that he engaged in consensual sexual activity and didn't realize the drugs would be fatal. But the jury wasn't convinced. In November 2016, after a 7-week trial, the jury found Stephen Port guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to a whole life order, meaning he will never be released from prison. Judge's words quoted, "You are a highly dangerous individual who has shown no remorse. You are responsible for 4 brutal murders. These were carefully planned and cruel acts." The families of the victims sat in the gallery, tearful but resolute. They had spent years fighting for the truth. And while the verdict brought some justice, it also revealed the systemic failures that allowed Port to kill again and again. Interviews with victim families, dramatized, says, "They ignored us. They ignored the patterns. Our sons would still be alive if they'd listened sooner." Public reaction was swift and furious. Media outlets condemned the Metropolitan Police for their mishandling of the case. Investigative reports showed that officers failed to link the deaths even after similarities were obvious. Forensics weren't properly analyzed. Port's history wasn't thoroughly checked. Even after Anthony Walgate's death, victim families were dismissed and gaslit repeatedly. It wasn't just negligence. For many, it felt like prejudice. The fact that all the victims were young, gay men raised questions about how seriously their deaths were taken. Would this have happened if the victims were straight? If they were women? If they weren't using dating apps? Those questions still linger today. And some says, these men weren't just ignored. They were written off. Their lives, their humanity, was treated as disposable. The aftermath of the trial sparked multiple investigations, including a Metropolitan Police internal review, a full inquest into each death, and a public inquiry into systemic homophobia within UK policing. Stephen Port remains behind bars at HMP Belmarsh, serving his whole life sentence. He has shown no remorse, no apology, no explanation. His crimes didn't just destroy 4 lives, they exposed a deep wound in how the justice system handles vulnerable victims. It has been over a decade since Stephen Port committed his first known murder. And yet, in many ways, the full truth of this case is still being written. While Port sits in a cell at HMP Belmarsh, serving a whole life order, the families of his victims continue to ask the same question: why did no one stop him sooner? Between 2015 and 2023, the victims' families fought for a full public inquest, not just into Port's actions, but into the Metropolitan Police's failure to connect the murders. In 2021, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, IOPC, launched a full review. It found that 17 officers had made serious errors. Among the findings, officers failed to cross-reference the deaths. Basic checks weren't completed, including fingerprinting and background data. A forged suicide note was accepted without proper examination. Family concerns were repeatedly dismissed, yet none of the officers involved were fired. Expert legal analyst. They didn't just miss clues, they ignored them. That's the difference between incompetence and systemic failure. For the victims' families, it was another blow. Donna Taylor says they let Jack down. They let all of them down. And we're still fighting to be heard. In December 2023, a coroner-led inquest confirmed what many already knew. The police missed clear connections between the 4 deaths. The investigations were rushed, superficial, and clouded by prejudice. The inquest concluded that basic investigative standards were not followed, standards that could have saved 3 young men after Anthony Walgate. The Metropolitan Police issued a formal apology in early 2024, admitting that the opportunity to stop Port earlier was tragically missed. Commissioner Mark Ruley stated, "We accept the findings of the inquest and deeply regret the pain caused to the victims' families. We failed. There is no excuse." But for many, the apology was too little, too late. The Stephen Port case has since become a symbol, not just of a serial killer's cruelty, but of institutional blind spots within British policing. It exposed how victims in marginalized communities, in this case, young gay men, can be overlooked, stereotyped, and ignored. The LGBTQ+ community rallied. In 2024 and 2025, activists organized vigils, campaigns, and petitions demanding change. Better LGBTQ+ training for police forces. Independent reviews of other unexplained deaths involving GHB, inclusion of Grindr-related assaults in crime reporting systems. A call to reinvestigate other potential victims linked to Port. Even now, in 2025, there are questions about whether Stephen Port acted alone in some incidents, or whether there are additional victims not yet identified. Police have reopened several cold cases from the area, revisiting GHB-related deaths once labeled as unexplained. One of the most chilling realities is that Port targeted people who trusted him, men who thought they were meeting someone friendly, someone real. Instead, they met a predator who exploited both their vulnerability and the blind spots of the system. Someone says, this wasn't just about one man. It was about the failure to value the lives of young gay men, and it cost them everything. For many viewers, this story isn't just true crime. It's a cautionary tale about who society listens to and who it doesn't. The case has since inspired a BBC drama titled 4 Lives, starring Stephen Merchant as Port, a Netflix documentary released in 2025, multiple podcasts and independent investigations, educational efforts in schools and LGBTQ+ centers. But tea and tragedy, true crime. UK is here to do what some never did. Tell the truth, without excuses. Anthony, Gabriel, Daniel, Jack. They were sons, friends, artists, workers, dreamers. They were more than victims, and they deserve to be protected. Click on subscribe button for more video.